Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we're back, and we're moving into our conversation for this morning, or first conversation, that is. We are joined by attorney at law, Jose Alpuche. Good morning.
Hi, Marlene.
All right, and Jose has the wonderful task of being able to help us understand what the cybercrime bill means, what it dictates, what do we need to know and understand, and that is the task at hand this morning. How are you?
Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. Quite an important conversation to have this morning about the Cybercrime Act. Yeah. I know there's a lot going on. I heard a little bit of the segment this morning with Mr. Murillo. Yeah. So this is probably equally important, I would say. Yeah. Even though we have, certain overriding things are probably on our mind this morning.
Of course. Well, let me start it off, because I think that one of the things, the bill is passed, it was celebrated because people spoke of how it offers some additional protection for crimes that were being committed that never existed in our laws. But we haven't delved deeper into finding out what all it covers and what new offenses are now being introduced. So I know that's part of where you wanted to start. But just looking at the bill, or looking at the legislation as it exists now, what is the first thing that stands out to you the most, Jose?
In terms of the Cybercrime Act,
Act.
Well, from the start, it defines what a computer system is. Well, first of all, there's no definition in the bill. In the act itself, it's an act, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
October 5th, 2020. So this is in force. It's not just a bill, it's in force. There is no cybercrime definition in the act, but it does set out a bunch of offenses, about 16 of them, right? And the thing to note right off the top is that it affects not necessarily just your online activity, but any activity involving a computer system. And they define computer system, very broad definition, a desktop computer, a laptop, a tablet, video game console, a smartphone, smart TV. So this is really any sort of device. I believe it, and those are included. So it could mean other computer systems as well. Off the top, I'm thinking ATM machine, that's also a computer system. Yeah. So it affects
your smart TV.
Correct, and a gaming console, etc. Yeah. So it affects all our activities involving computer devices, basically. So how we interact with people or information using these devices will be impacted by this legislation.
Yeah. Now, we didn't really have legislation that covered the use and misuse, I should say, of the technology that we've grown accustomed to over at least the past decade. So some of this is absolutely necessary. I want to talk about what new offenses are being introduced in the Cybercrime Act.
Well, there are certain things that were probably always illegal. Threatening people, if you do that online or in person, that's always been an offense.
True.
Threatening words and so on, that's always been an offense. Things that are new, sort of relate, stealing information. I mean, we've always had theft on the books, so that's not anything particularly new. Mm-hmm. But certain things that would have been difficult to prosecute have now been given some scope, such as basically hacking into someone's computer. There wasn't necessarily an offense for that. I mean, if you stole something from someone, like if you would break into someone's account and steal money from their bank account or something, I mean, you could be charged with theft. But now, just unauthorized access to someone's computer is an offense. So there's a whole slew of offenses which generally I would classify as hacking.
Yeah.
Hacking offenses. There are some offenses that regulate our online behavior.
Yeah.
And I think those are probably, like I said, not new in terms of we probably could have prosecuted people for some of the behavior that's existed before, but this just makes it much more specific, and I think probably much easier for the state to prosecute people for behavior we consider unacceptable online or using computer systems.
There's a separation of that offense as well in looking at, there's hacking, which is unauthorized access to the system itself, and then there's also the unauthorized access to the data that is there, and even if you duplicate it as well, that being an offense.
Yes, so for example, if you intentionally access the wording, the first offense created, intentionally accessing a computer system of another person without authorization or by infringing any security measure of the computer system. So if someone accesses your phone without your permission, that's an offense.
Yeah.
If someone gets into your computer at work or at home somewhere without your permission, that's an offense. And if they do it by either guessing your password or using some virus or hack or something to get into your system, that alone is an offense. Now, if they access your computer and then they use it to, let's say, install some kind of ransomware on your system, no, that's an offense. That's the law says intentionally and without lawful excuse or justification, damaging computer data of another person, obstructing, interrupting, or interfering with another person's lawful use of computer data, or denying access to computer data of another person who is authorized to access the computer data. So those things like ransomware and spyware and things like that we really didn't contemplate in our criminal code before, those are now explicit offenses as a result of the Cybercrime Act.
Now, it's key for us to go back to the definitions, because computer data actually means a wide range of materials. What's outlined there?
Okay, I didn't take notes on that, but I have the act in front of me here, so let me just, I could read it. Computer data means any representation of facts, concepts, machine-readable code or instructions, or information, including text, audio, image, or video, that is in a form suitable for processing in a computer system and is capable of being sent, received, or stored. It's really any sort of information that you could find on a phone, on a computer, on a gaming console, anything, a smart TV, all of that.
Any digital material, Yeah,
all of that is covered here.
Wow. So you're saying if somebody goes into my phone, let's use, because I think that's probably the first concerning one for people, without my permission, whether they hacked, figure out my password, take a photo or take a video or take a phone recording, which is another issue, and send it to themselves or copy it, they have committed an offense under this act.
They've committed two offenses.
Yes.
They've gotten into your computer device. So that's one offense. Just going into it alone is an offense. And dealing with your information is also another offense. I mean, what I had mentioned before was sort of that ransomware thing,
Yeah.
but also an offense for inputting, transmitting, damaging, modifying, or suppressing computer data. So if someone transmits your computer data without your permission,
Yeah.
that's a separate offense as well. That's the fine for that is a bit more than just accessing your computer system. So accessing your computer system, there's a minimum. It's not a minimum. It's just as a fine of $3,000 or 3 years in prison,
Yeah.
or $5,000 and 5 years in prison. And there's a difference. The director of public prosecutions in bringing any charges against someone can determine whether or not they will prosecute you in the magistrate's court or in the Supreme Court. And depending on where you're prosecuted, the fines vary. So if you're prosecuted in the Supreme Court, the fines and the prison time is more than if you're prosecuted in the magistrate's court. So the purpose of that is there would be some activities, some offenses that probably are not as serious as other ones. So the DPP has a discretion to decide how serious this offense is and where it should be prosecuted. So that accounts for the variation in fines and prison terms for the same offense.
Yeah.
If it's magistrate's court versus the Supreme Court that you're being tried.
Yeah. You know, it's also, you know, when you look at it, does it also include if somebody deletes or removes your data?
Yes, all of that is covered.
Okay.
Any sort of manipulation of your data is covered. So removing it, blocking access to your data, transmitting your data, all of that is covered. All of that's an offense.
Okay. So that's the first area to look at, just the protection of the computer data that we possess on our personal devices. And as you said very early on, this includes just about every electronic, from the Alexa that you have in your house to the game console that your children use to the smart TV you watch, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your desktop.
That's right. I mean, nowadays we have what they call the Internet of Things. So there are companies making refrigerators with computers in them.
Yeah.
And when the milk has expired or whatever it is, all those things would be covered here because all of those things are considered computer devices.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of stuff, of stuff that we interact with on a daily basis that's covered by this.
All right, let's talk about the other new offenses that you wanted to point out.
I just wanted to. Well, I guess the thing, perhaps I could just go through them here.
Yeah.
So, right. So there's an offense for exporting or importing, distributing, disclosing, or otherwise making available a device or computer program designed or adapted, or be a security measure by which the whole or any part of the computer system or computer data is capable of being accessed. So if you are someone who sells basically hacking software, that's an offense. If you give someone the tools to break into someone else's device, even if they don't use it, if you have it in your possession, that's an offense. We talked about modifying people's computer data. That's an offense. There's one which says intentionally inputting, modifying, suppressing computer data, and that modification causes the data to become inauthentic. So changing someone's information. So I think this is in relation to identity fraud.
Yeah.
There's also an offense of with the intent to defraud or deceive another person for the purpose of procuring an economic benefit for the person or another. If you input, alter, delete, or suppress computer data or interfere with the functioning of a computer system with intent to assume the identity of another using a computer system or data to obtain, transfer, process, or use a means of identification of another person or make use of the security measures of another person. So that's identity theft.
Okay.
So those weren't offenses. It would have been difficult to prosecute those offenses before, but now I think it makes it easy for cases of identity theft if the person is if he's available in the jurisdiction, of course.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't, perhaps through extradition laws and so on, we could probably find persons in the U.S. or certain other countries to prosecute. But generally speaking, this will affect people here in Belize, in the jurisdiction.
Yeah. And identity theft is something that, we know it takes place. We know it's very concerning, and people think of it in terms of, the financial aspect, but it could also be that somebody is trying to perhaps use my identity. If you think of social media, for example, making a fake profile as me, would that count as well?
Yes, that would be covered here. It's very broad.
Okay. Now,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's there's one particular offense. You need to do it for an economic benefit, so that's the identity theft aspect. Or just modifying someone's data or causing it to become inauthentic, like you said, using a fake profile, using Marlena's profile on Facebook or something like that. They're using your image and misrepresenting themselves. That's an offense.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, under this, I'm not sure. What the police's view is, if this is something a big problem for them to want to prosecute.
Yeah.
Maybe in the water, maybe in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
And Marlena, you would be offended and upset by someone doing that for you, but doing that to you. But I'm not sure if the police would necessarily want to devote the resources, but perhaps I'm not saying.
No, it depends what they use the information for, of course, or what they're trying to use the identity for. The identity theft, the aspects of using, misusing, modifying, duplicating data, those are all kind of, I guess the basis of looking at some of the cyber crimes that can take place. Now, I just wanted to touch, because we don't talk very often about hacking, and we don't talk very much about identity theft. But these are things that are very much prevalent in other parts of the world. So what do you think about the legislation as it exists in terms of how comprehensive it is to address these issues that we know probably takes place in Belize, but we just don't really look at it very deeply?
Well, this legislation is sort of a model legislation that I believe came out primarily out of Europe. So they've included things in there to capture things that happen in those more developed countries where there's a lot of instances of identity theft and breaking into computer systems and things like that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know how much hacking happens in Belize, but the thing is, if you wanted, like, let's say some hacker in Europe or Russia or the United States or somewhere illegally breached some government system over there in, let's say, France, for example.
Yeah.
And disappears and turns up in Belize, right? That would be grounds to extradite that person, because I'm not sure if we have an extradition agreement with France, but
Yeah.
let's say we have an extradition. For argument's sake, we have an extradition agreement with France. You could only extradite a person if the offense they committed in France is also an offense here.
Yeah.
So this, for us having it here, for us having this cybercrime legislation, it sort of hinders or allows us to prosecute people on a global scale. So Belize would not be any safe harbor for some
Cyber criminals.
international identity thief or something like that. Because we have laws against it, and their home country could, if they have an extradition treaty with Belize, could rely on our legislation to extradite them to that country for prosecution. So it's important that if you want this thing to be effective, I mean, hackers and all of that stuff, that happens on a global scale. There's people, in Europe breaking into systems in the United States, etc. So it's never just centralized in one jurisdiction. I mean, the internet is all over the place. It has no borders. So if you want to effectively prosecute these people, as much countries as possible have to have pretty much the same laws making these activities illegal, so that people can wander off or disappear.
Yeah, I think you said it right. When you're in the digital world, there are no borders. And so what someone may do to you from any other part of the world, you need to be protected for. So those are very progressive in being able to have those covered. So I know that there's other sections that we have to get into, and we definitely want to talk about the personal protection for children and for private information as well. But looking at the data aspect, are there any other new offenses that you think people really need to understand when they use their technology?
All right, so there's one in particular, I think, which we should probably become very familiar with, and I'm not sure how the authorities will handle it.
Okay.
But there's a section 16 of the Act makes infringing the rights of a copyright owner, patent owner, etc. No, that's an offense. That's an offense under the Cybercrime Act. It carries a penalty of a fine of $3,000 and 3 years in prison for breaching the rights of a copyright owner. There's behavior in Belize where we breach the rights of copyright owners pretty much all the time, in terms of music, movies, things like that.
Interesting, yeah.
Before there are remedies under the Copyright Act for a copyright owner to come to Belize and apply for an injunction or something like that, to have his copyrighted material be removed or something like that. But now, under the Cybercrimes Act, that's actually an offense. So if I make a song and that's copied without my permission, I could go complain to the police. The police could investigate that and prosecute the person for copying that. So, we do that. In Belize, that's something that happens all the time.
Yeah.
There's apps people download on their TV to watch movies. That would technically here be against the law. I think it would require the owner of that copyright to make a complaint to the police. I don't think the police
would take it upon themselves to do so.
Would take it upon themselves to prosecute someone for watching a bootleg version of Marvel's Avengers or something like that. But if a copyright owner, it would probably be in the case of a local artist, I would think would be the most common scenario. If a local artist could potentially go and complain to the police that his copyright, his rights as a copyright owner are being violated by someone or a group of persons, and that's an offense. That's something I think probably even our local media houses would need to look at and seriously take a look at what they're airing and so on, just to ensure that they're not exposing themselves to any risks here under this Cybercrime Act.
Yeah.
So I think that is behavior in Belize that's quite typical, that is now an offense under this legislation here.
Yeah, I think the issue of pirating that we have seen as kind of just a custom is definitely one that we were aware is an offense in other countries. But what we're saying now is that with the Cybercrime Act, it is now an offense in Belize as well.
Yeah, an explicit offense. I mean.
Yeah. So if I make a commercial promoting me and I use a Rihanna song, for example, and they want to come and charge me for use of their music without permission, they have a case because it is illegal here.
Yes, and it wouldn't even be necessarily Rihanna who needs to come down. I believe we do have our what's it called, BizCap.
Yeah, you have BizCap.
Yeah, so BizCap, for example, they have sort of authority over some of that copyrighted material of international artists, and they could potentially make complaints on behalf of foreign artists for breach of copyright and so on. So it's something, like I said, different entities here in Belize would need to have a look at and put some consideration towards.
Yeah.
One more thing, I don't know if you need to go to a break or anything.
No, we're gonna just go through with the rest of it. So let's keep it moving, and I want to talk about the protection for children as well soon. So go ahead.
Sure. Just I think another type of behavior here in Belize that's sort of quite common and we take it for granted that would be an offense under this act. If we look at section 15(4) of the act, it says it's an offense to disseminate false information, knowing it to be false, with the intent to cause harm to the reputation of someone or cause the other person to be the subject of ridicule and so on. That, I think, could potentially affect a lot of people in Belize when it comes to statements they make on social media.
That's right.
And it could also, again, I mean, there's several talk shows in Belize, and it's election season, and politics in Belize has always been sort of a bit off color when it comes to making comments about politicians and so on. So I think not you, Marlene. You're not in this category, but there are there are.
I guess it's subjective, but I mean I think this is one of the things that I had looked at where it said object the person to be the subject of, for the other person to be subject of public ridicule, contempt, hatred, or embarrassment. Now, what embarrasses me? I have a different quota from maybe what embarrasses you.
Right. So
it's once I feel embarrassed, I can go ahead and pursue.
Correct. And so at some point, if some offense gets prosecuted under this section, a judge somewhere will need to make a determination as to what's embarrassment. If it's some sort of reasonable person test.
Yeah.
If a reasonable person is embarrassed by this, then it's
that's fascinating.
or if it's something personal. So, like you said, what may embarrass me may not embarrass you. You might have to take the person's circumstances into account.
Yeah.
You know, in the legal profession, if I trade on my reputation. So if someone would say something in terms of my competence or in terms of my integrity, that would cause me harm or embarrassment. That might not affect some other person. The same statements might not affect some other person in the same way. So there's room there for a subjective test.
Yeah.
And a lot will depend on what a judge.
Yeah. I
determines.
can't. That would be a really interesting case. A judge determining what constitutes embarrassment or ridicule. But it does bring, and I think Section 15 itself is one that has some really, it is necessary for people to know, especially as they maneuver themselves online now, because it talks about threat of violence. It talks about the very same point that we were talking about with ridicule or embarrassment. It also talks about the intimate, is it that the part that has the intimate photos?
No, that's Section 12.
Oh, this has the intimidation section, so that also, I guess, is a threat. But let me put this into perspective, though, Jose, because we're in election season, and I know that you have, I don't know if you're on social media, but you've probably at least been exposed to it. You see how people talk to each other and how people comment and weigh in on topics. There are a bunch of internet trolls for every topic that there is, and they can be really malicious. There are internet troll competitions now that are politically geared. Now, what you're saying is under this legislation, under this act, those types of behavior can be deemed illegal.
Well, yeah, they could be offenses. What you're talking about, so the section I had mentioned, Section 15.4, that's knowingly disseminating false information.
Yeah.
So for you to commit an offense under that section, you have to know that what you're saying about a person is false.
False.
Right? However, Section 15.1 talks about intimidation, right? So that section, I'll just read it out quickly here. It says it's an offense if a person with the intent to compel another person to do or refrain from doing an act uses a computer system to publish or transmit computer data that intimidates the other person or threatens the other person with violence or damage to property, or threatens a member of the other person's family with violence. And then it gives a definition of what intimidate means. It says intimidate is to cause in the mind of a reasonable person an apprehension or injury to the person, his family or dependent, or violence or damage to the person's property, or cause a person substantial emotional distress. So the part B there, causing a person substantial emotional distress. Again, what may cause me substantial emotional distress won't cause a 10-year-old child substantial emotional distress, and vice versa.
And depending on the reputation of the person as well.
Depending on their mental state.
Yeah.
I mean, if the person is depressed, things could seemingly something might be innocuous, might cause, which might, wash over me or somebody else, a depressed person or an emotionally unstable person, that might cause them substantial emotional distress. Yeah. So, that's something, again, a judge has to decide whether or not that's an offense, because I said something online that caused someone substantial emotional distress.
And it's twofold, because you mentioned Section 4, where it speaks about false information, publishing false information that may cause harm to a reputation or may subject a person to ridicule, contempt, hatred, or embarrassment. But then in Section 5, it talks about using personal or private information. So it could be true or untrue, but if you cause embarrassment, ridicule, hatred, contempt, ruin a reputation, it's still an offense.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. And we're looking at the potential conviction. What's the charge here? What can a person face if they are convicted?
Yeah, it says right there, I'm just looking at your screen there, it's $10,000 and a term of imprisonment for 5 years, and that's in front of a magistrate, or $15,000 and a term of imprisonment for 10 years, and that would be in front of a Supreme Court judge.
Wow.
So the penalties can be potentially quite steep.
You know, it seems like there has to be, and we're so quickly running out of time, but there has to be a whole re-education now as to what people can and cannot do online. Because I think for a very long time, people have just been going on and feeling that they are capable of saying whatever they want, threatening whoever they want, ridiculing whoever they want. And I mean, even if we go down to, I know there's an area where it says if you abet or encourage, to use my word, people to do something, incite, that's a word, you can also be charged.
Yeah, there's a broad section there, section 17. So it's aiding, abetting. Let me just.
Yeah, attempt, aiding, or abetting. So if I advise, incite, attempt, aid, abet, counsel, procure, or facilitate the commission of any offense.
Right. So, I mean, that could even apply to you lending someone your computer, and they're using that computer to make these intimidating statements or so on, or they use your phone to go on Facebook or whatever. I mean, technically, that's aiding that person to commit the offense. So it's quite broad. I'm not sure how the state would treat with this, and how they would use it. I would think that it would just be the most egregious of cases that they would choose to prosecute. But potentially, it could be, and I think this is one of my sort of concerns with the legislation, that it could be used to chill political discourse, which generally now appears online on social media. And if people are being prosecuted for making political statements because they cause a politician, substantial emotional distress, even if that person wins the case, goes through a trial and is not convicted, just the fear that you would be prosecuted under this legislation could potentially restrict you from engaging in political discourse that we may not consider offensive, and that we may consider probably necessary to our democracy. So
that's interesting.
There is a bit of a danger here that people's free speech could be compromised as a result of this.
When you think of people who hold public office or who have a public image, let me use myself as an example. People may ridicule me online, but I also am very aware and cognizant of the fact that does come with the turf, that people will like and dislike certain things and be critical. Now, where someone threatens my life, I clearly have a case, or threatens violence, I have a case, but that's subjective to me. So if there's a touchy or sensitive politician, for example, who is not in public office as yet, but vying for public office, and they feel that a discussion on their assets is something that bothers them or is ruining their reputation, then they would have a case under this law?
I would hope not. Like I said, I think if the state were so minded, they could probably find almost any kind of criticism to be offensive to this act.
Yeah.
I would hope that some that the prosecutors and so on they use some I would say common sense.
Yeah.
And make a determination as to what is just political discourse and criticism, and what is potentially dangerous. The intention of this legislation in terms of the sections we're talking about here, that's cyber, what we call cyberbullying.
Yeah. So there's also the portion, and because we're running so quickly out of time, and I'm trying to find it. It is in response to the situation where we saw people's private images and videos being shared without their consent, and that is now covered under this legislation as an offense. What portion is that?
Section 12.
Okay. So talk us through that so people can now know. It was wrong without a law before, but now that is punishable by law.
Yeah, so it says, without the explicit consent of another person, intentionally capturing, storing in, publishing, or transmitting through a computer system an image of a private area of the other person, and private area refers to genitalia, buttocks, or breasts. That's an offense. So you didn't have to take the picture. You didn't have to break into the person's phone or the person's computer to get the picture. You didn't have to be the one who the person was, who the person sent it to, but you receive it from a third party or a fourth party or a fifth party in some cases. In most cases, these things circulate. You don't know who's the person who initially sent the image out. If you're transmitting that image and you don't have that person's explicit consent, that's an offense. So there's no defense to say, well, I'm not the one. Somebody just sent this nude photo to me, and I put it in a WhatsApp group, or I forwarded it to my friend or something like that. Transmitting the image is an offense. So
if I just share it.
Right, yeah, sharing the image is an offense. So if someone sends you an image like that, it's best you just delete the thing right away.
Yeah.
Because it is a crime under this legislation, punishable by a fine of $5,000 and imprisonment for 5 years, or $10,000 and imprisonment for 10 years if you are tried in the Supreme Court.
Is there any statute of limitations for this?
You have 12 months. The law provides for you have to prosecute it within 12 months of it. So whatever the behavior is, the state
since the last publication or transmission.
Well, that 12-month period covers all the offenses. So it's not necessarily transmit. It's when you committed the offense.
Yeah.
So whatever offense it is, whenever you committed it, there's 12 months to prosecute.
Okay. So Jose, we're out of time, and I know that we only scratched the surface of what's included with the bill, with the act. But the purpose of this was kind of to get everyone to understand that the rules of engagement have changed online with the introduction of the Cyber Crime Act. what would you say to people about how to know what their limitations are, and also to keep in mind the idea of protecting freedom of speech?
Well, I would say that people, when they're making statements online, consider what you would do in real life. So, would you make that statement to a person in a bar or at a restaurant or in the park to their face?
Yeah.
Because the internet gives us this sort of anonymity and sort of a sense of distance from people, and gives people a sense of freedom to say whatever they want about someone or to someone. And I would say have a think about whether or not you would say this to the person to their face, because I think that would determine whether or not you should say it online, really.
Yeah. And that's publicly and privately, right?
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
like private message or public statement online.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I wouldn't say this if I wouldn't say something about you to your face or to your family member in real life, I probably shouldn't say it online, because it's probably harmful or would run foul of this legislation. I think it's trying to get people to have some manners and decorum and so on. I guess the thing though, like you mentioned about freedom of speech, and this will come if the state prosecutes speech online under this legislation, especially political speech. I suspect those would be the things that would garner the most attention. There has to be some sort of balance with a person's freedom of speech. So, but like I said, I just want to reiterate that there is a concern, though, even if I say something, I say some political statement online, and it turns out that it's protected by my constitutional right to freedom of speech, and I'm not prosecuted. I'm found innocent of an offense under this act. There's still the potential for me to be wary of making political statements or making political criticism just because I may be prosecuted.
Yeah.
And all the expense and embarrassment and inconvenience that comes with having to defend yourself against a criminal charge, that in and of itself may be enough to make people to silence criticism. So it's something I hope that we don't have to deal with, that the authorities just really use this to deal with the most severe of cases of online bullying and things like that, but not use it as some tool to sort of just overall suppress criticism.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for opening our eyes this morning to what all is included in this recent legislation. And it is, in so many ways, long overdue, but definitely something that we have to pay close attention to as to how it will be enforced. Thank you so much, Jose.
You're welcome, Marlene.
All right.
Take care.
And stay safe. With that, though, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be joined by the president of the Teachers Union, talking a bit about her Senate experience and definitely looking at the situation of education in today's world. We're coming back in just a few, so please stay tuned.